Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Interact podcast. My name is Josh Haynam. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Interact. And today I'm joined by Bri Jones, who is the head of marketing at Stitch. We're going to chat about quizzes and interactive content and all things content marketing. So I'm really excited to have you here. I'm going to cue you up right off the bat, where it's just tell us about the quizzes that you've made, because you've made a number of really cool ones, and just how interactive content has fit into your marketing strategy.
Yeah. So I will say I've actually used Interact at several companies before, and to me, it's always just been like, you know, millennials, they're your main buying audience, and we all grew up with BuzzFeed quizzes. And so to me, first, it's like a really fun, unique experience. But I can kind of jump into more context too about my company and what we do and kind of our approach and how this fits into our broader brand strategy before I get into like the tactics of the quizzes. So, my company's called Stitch. We are a marketing services company that primarily focuses on brands who use Braze, which is a customer engagement platform, primarily used by B2C marketers. And so as a services company, obviously our value that we provide to our clients is in strategic services and like understanding how to apply trends and best practices to their actual workflows. And so quizzes, we see that as honestly like a direct extension of that approach. And our general kind of how we sell to our clients is the philosophy of give away the work and know that we are providing value to brands, whether or not they choose to, invest in a partnership with us now, or maybe that will pay off 6, 12, 18 months down the road. So with that, quizzes for us are, like I said, an extension of that. And our main use cases currently are when we see large pieces of content put out into the marketplace, like Braze publishes their annual customer engagement review, which is a huge research-backed report. It is their biggest piece of content throughout the year. Like there's so much great insights in there. And so our approach is like, hey, we're not going to dump more information on you. Like there's so much being dumped on marketers every day. You log on to LinkedIn, there's like 38 thought leaders telling you what you're doing wrong. You're getting, hit up by Ad Age, Ad Week with all these trends, and everyone's just trying to keep up. So we're like, hey, we're going to help you cut through the noise and like go through the quiz, and then it will give you like how to apply those insights to your marketing strategy. We don't gate our stuff. That is intentional because it's give away the work and create that value exchange really early on and assume that it will lead to something for us.
Yeah, I like that idea of taking lots of information and paring it down to specific information that's relevant to you. It's almost like there was this huge ballooning of content and information over the last, 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's almost like, okay, there's too much. Can you like tell me what's relevant to me?
Exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
and AI is only going to make that worse. So that's like even more like our approach to content as a whole is we say something when we have something to say. Like we are not hitting a content quota, and everything we do, we like look at through the lens of like, is this legitimately going to be helpful to our clients?
Yeah, that's a good point with the AI. I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective, but you can
Yeah.
just generate, John Oliver did a video this week on AI slop, which is just
Yeah.
like blah that you
Yep.
throw out from AI, where it's like, whether it's images of interior design that,
Mm-hmm.
you post on Pinterest, or, thought leadership posts that you post on a blog. It's just like the average content is
Yeah.
just useless. It's like there's literally no use for this. So I like that thinking. How do you know what's going to be valuable to your audience? I think that's kind of the next question of like, okay, if I'm going to pare this down and I'm only going to do a certain number of stuff, how do I know that what I'm putting out is truly unique in the market?
Yeah. That's a great question. I would say it is like we've almost just built the marketing function with that intentionality being there right off the bat. So my very first hire was actually a solution marketing manager, and her role is to stay like very close to what we're actually doing for our clients. That way, because I think this happens all the time where there's a huge divide between like what marketing's putting out into the world versus like the realities of what their clients want from their company. And so we just kind of make sure to stay really tightly aligned to our delivery team and what they're actually doing for clients, what they're being asked about by clients or from clients. And then same from our sales team, like what are we selling? Like we just have a very, very tight pulse on that. And that goes back into like, we are very much a quality over quantity. And so like having those conversations internally takes time, but we'd rather take the time to have those conversations and create meaningful things versus just being another noisemaker.
That I haven't heard of anybody doing that on the content side, where you actually have a solutions person
Mhm.
on the team. That person's on your team.
Yeah, and she is the one driving our content strategy and the actual production of content, and so it is like extremely rooted in like she'll have a conversation one day with a solution architect who will say, "Hey, I was working with a huge brand on how to implement um, content cards within Braze," and so she'll come back and be like, "Hey, I think we need to do a YouTube video about content cards," or maybe it's a quiz of like we're getting a lot of questions about one of the things that we're actually looking to do in Q3. I'll just sort of hopefully my head of alliances doesn't hate that I'm soft launching this, but Braves just acquired an awesome tool called OfferFit, and a big question that's coming up for clients who are really eager to use it is like, do we have the right data in place to make this tool effective? And so we're going to be building out a data readiness assessment and build it in Interact. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I like this a lot. It's like you are filling in the gaps, right?
Mhm.
Like, because if we think about the AI, like the AI has the everything that's known already, but
Mhm.
you're finding the unknowns. Like,
Yep.
what are the questions that are coming up with our existing implementations? And then like this example of a new offering, a new feature, a new tool. What are the
Mhm.
questions that are going to come up with that? And then the next question that I would have is like, how do you know what format of content is best to answer the question? Like you mentioned YouTube, then quiz, then you guys have great blog stuff too. I'm
Mhm.
sure other channels. How do you choose the right channel to answer the question?
Yeah, I think it's a balance of honestly like team capacity, but then also like what do we want the client to take out of this? And so if it's more of a general like high level point of view, like obviously blogs are super quick and easy to produce. I think if like for quizzes, that's I think where we'd want a more personalized approach for our clients, given they span data readiness or they span where they're at in terms of like loyalty maturity. And so when we want to give them the tools to like describe where they're currently at and their pain points, that's when we'll kind of go the quiz route. And then I think from a video, we've seen a lot of success there when it comes to like demos and more technical of like, hey, you want to know how to set up OfferFit? Here's what that looks like.
Yeah, I like this picture that's being drawn here, where it's like you're extracting the problems that you can address with content, and then you're figuring out which tool in the tool set is best to answer that problem. And
Mhm.
I like what you said about I kind of want to double click on that one, the where it's like you want someone to describe their situation if you're going to
Mhm.
do a quiz or an assessment format. Um, how do you kind of cue in on that? I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with quizzes is like, how do I know when a piece of content is going to spark the types of questions in my customer's head where they need to talk about themselves first in order
Mhm.
to feel like they can connect with an answer? And this is a very unclear question,
Yeah.
but
I
you
think
kind of
what
get what
you're
I'm saying of like, how do you know when that's going to be the right thing?
Yeah, I think it's because they are actually legitimate conversations we're having with clients. And so, like,
Mm,
obviously, in the sales process and the consulting process, it's a lot of questions, answers, documentation, operating within frameworks of like, hey, we will walk you through integrating OfferFit or going through an implementation, or you want to get your loyalty program from point A to point B. Like all these things are things that we have at least somewhat standardized internally and are having real conversations with clients about. So just like taking the materials we're already using internally, repurposing them in kind of the quiz format. And that's where like if we were having a legitimate discovery call with a prospect about and their goal is to mature their loyalty program, these are the questions we would ask, and these are the exact like options we give them. We turn that into a quiz. So it's almost like scaling that conversation and letting people kind of like preview that conversation without actually talking to a Stitch rep, assuming that they'll understand where we're coming from, the things we're going to be looking for when they do come to that conversation with a real person.
yeah, I like that idea of scaling a conversation because obviously there's a point at which you can't scale a conversation
Mm-hmm.
anymore, and then there's also this this space of conversations that are very specific. Like
Mm-hmm.
you don't want it to be a chat bot because it will be too broad and maybe the answers that you're giving are too long or it's not going to ask the right questions. And so it is a scripted conversation. It's the
Mm-hmm.
same thing every single time. Um, so you don't want it to be like this, just like whatever meandering. It can go anywhere. You want it to be more targeted. And then that's where the quiz is really great at just emulating the actual conversations that you have.
Yeah, exactly. And there's always going to be like nuances for every brand, every client, every industry. But we do our best to like figure out what the baseline is across all of those things and start to create value. Obviously, having a conversation with a real person is going to be inherently a lot more valuable because it will address the nuances there. But I think quizzes are a great starting point.
Yeah, oh, I like that a lot. Another question that popped into mind is, everybody gets very hung up on proof and on being able to show that things are working. And while I resonate a lot with the way that you're describing content, and it makes perfect sense to me, we're a content-led company, and it's very similar to what we do. But for somebody that's on the outside, or maybe they need to prove to their bosses or their company, like, this content strategy I'm doing is working, but there's not necessarily hard metrics of like, oh, well, I can track the leads from they opted in here, and then I can see the whole journey through HubSpot or whatever system you're using. How are you thinking about proof with all of this content?
Yeah. I will say for any marketer listening to this podcast, they're probably going to be very jealous with what I'm about to say. But I am really fortunate to work for a CEO and a leadership team who inherently understands the value of marketing and building a brand first and foremost. And so, people will be surprised to know that we do not gate any of our quizzes, even though they are built like to be really high value content pieces, because we are just focused on, like I said, giving away the work. And so far that has done nothing but be successful for us. Like, we are a 3-year-old company and we've grown, I can't even math right now, like probably, I think we will triple in revenue from this year to last year. And then I think we did the same before. Like, in general, we've grown tremendously. And I think right now what makes us know that what we're doing is worthwhile is that we get comments from prospects in the sales process all of the time, about how they watched our YouTube videos, or they took our quiz, or they read our blogs, or they see our LinkedIn posts. And so, like, we just know that we are being seen by the right people, even though like our actual total addressable market is very small. So like, if you look at our stats on Google Analytics or our YouTube views, like they're small numbers. However, like, we know undoubtedly that they're being seen by the right people because we're very targeted and specific, and intentional about the content we produce.
Yeah. I mean, if you are targeted in that way, right? Like, you're only making content that does apply to your ideal customer, the ideal buyer, and then you have views that, like, okay, you compare it against some company that reaches everybody, and it's like, well, we have a minuscule number of views. But if it's the right people, that's just as valuable, if not more valuable, than having a bunch of views on something that doesn't really, resonate with the target audience. Like, what's the point of that? There's no point of that.
Like, that's been our entire approach, is like basically acknowledging the fact that we are in a very niche space and focusing on being the best of the best at that very small niche that we play in, versus like trying to be a company who does everything for everyone. And so even like if you think about SEO or some of like the keywords we target, it's going to be like the bottom of funnel, like our super low search volume, like Braze experts, Braze consultants, Braze agency. Like, I'm not trying to get someone who's like marketing services or marketing agency, because we're not a full service agency and we only work with a very small subset of clients. So.
Yeah. And then the point about like listening to what people say on the sales calls, or when they are already customers, like, oh, where'd you hear about us? How'd you hear about us? And you can just like have the actual anecdotal evidence versus needing everything to be in Google Analytics or in some sort of tracking software. That seems to be like almost a great reset that I'm seeing amongst like what I would call the best content marketers, where it's like, you're not just trying to dial in and see exactly somebody's journey through all this stuff by implementing these softwares that do maybe sketchy things to track people. You're just like listening, and then based on that listening, it's working. And then you can see, in your case with the revenue, it's like, okay, well, that's the North Star. We're all aligned around that. And we're not just a content team over here, like trying to hit our,
our blog
view.
quota.
yeah, blog coder, views metrics, right? Like all these things. And we were kind of chatting about this before we hit record, but like it's just such a different world now
Mhm.
than 10 years ago, when it was like, all right, number of pieces of content, amount of traffic, impressions. Like now it's kind of like, yeah, well, is the company growing?
Yeah.
And if it's not, and like nobody is saying like, oh, I heard about you guys because I watch your YouTube,
Mhm.
then something's off. And that's really, really clear. And it's just like a human to human interaction versus trying to look at numbers and reverse engineer what's going on.
Yeah. And I think it's nice too because like we're not trying to take credit for all the leads that we source. Like we just have a really great culture of sharing. Like the sales team is very quick to share of like, hey, so and so prospect just shouted out our YouTube videos. And like there's no like I think that while I understand that a lot of companies, and I'm sure that we will eventually get to a point where we need to be more intentional about tracking lead sources and maybe starting to gate content, that I also think that creates just like a weird friction between sales and marketing to be like, no, I source the lead, no, I source the lead. And it's kind of like we're all in this together, we're growing, and that's all that matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, which gives you a huge leg up because, like you're saying, with having somebody that's in implementations
Mhm.
actually on your team, if implementations was trying to prove like, oh, we did this, then they wouldn't want to share, right?
Yeah.
Like it has to all be aligned in terms of the entire company being on the same page. Otherwise, the information is going to be withheld, or somebody wants
Mhm.
to take credit for having the information or driving the growth. You're not going to all be aligned going after the same goal.
Yep, exactly. And we like have done a very good job, I think, at setting that expectation of like how our entire culture and company operates from day one. And so like one thing that I think is really special about Stitch is like from like a services perspective, marketers tend to come in at a certain like level in their growth. However, like Michael, our CEO, I'm like the first person he hired when he was starting the company, and I think that created the expectation that marketing is just like a part of the culture, and so our team is very willing to share. They're willing to surface those questions that they're hearing from clients. And even I do an onboarding session with every new hire when they come in where I say like the expectation is that everyone is a contributor to our brand and our culture and our marketing, and like here's different ways that this comes to life. It can be as simple as like, hey, you let us know that you're getting a lot of questions about offer fit or loyalty best practices from your clients. Level 2 is like you start writing content for us. Level 3 is that you like sign up to like, there's kind of the more reactionary of like, hey, I want to write a blog about marketing versus transactional emails because I get asked a lot and I have a strong point of view. Or there's the third level of like we have more dedicated content pieces like our newsletter or our YouTube series that will more like let people sign up for, and that there's a bit clearer of a framework in how that looks.
Yeah, I really like that. It kind of reminds me of the Toyota manufacturing way, right? Where it's like everybody in the company can make suggestions about
Mhm.
improving the manufacturing. And so there's like this famous story about how some, entry level employee realized that all the employees eat lunch in the break rooms during lunchtime, and they could turn off the lights in the whole production floor during lunch, and it saved
Mhm.
like $12 million a year because it's a huge place. So then
Yep.
they're like heavily rewarded this person for pointing that out.
Mhm.
And but if there is no, like, if that's not incentivized, it's like disincentivized. Like I
Mhm.
think it is actually in a lot of places where it's like, oh, well, you shared that information, and now the content team is going to take credit for this
Mhm.
win, and you're not going to get any credit. And so it's better for you to not say anything.
Yeah, yeah. Like it's almost like you can shoot yourself in the foot with almost like overly metricsing everything. I just made up a word, but like yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
right now we're at the scale where we are very much all in this together, and that is what works for us. And I think it just creates noise to start doing the who gets credit for what game.
Yeah, and I guess at a certain scale, it might become hard. It might become difficult
Mhm.
to figure that out if you have a content team of 50 people and an
Yeah.
onboarding team of 300. Then maybe it would be hard to have that kind of collaboration. But, and this is kind of just pontificating, but like with AI on the scene now, and maybe your team is 50 people and 300 agents, like perhaps you can still do all the information sharing, and
Mhm.
the agents are doing kind of the repetitive tasks, and the human people are still able to communicate with each other in the same way. And so maybe the next wave of business will be built this way, where
Yeah.
it's information is shared, and the goal is to figure out what customers need help with, solve those problems. And if it's with content, it's whichever format helps solve the problem most effectively, whether
Mhm.
it's demoing on a YouTube, or drawing in the customer through a quiz format, or having it be like documentation if they need step-by-step instructions, whatever it may be. I like that. I think that'd be
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, that's very much something that we are looking at internally, is how can we use AI to scale some of this information sharing and also make it so that like we can start to create content without having to schedule meetings with the SMEs internally. Like how can we just sort of harness the knowledge from the organization to help create content faster? And that's even like more because what happens when they're like, hey, I'm working on 3 accounts right now. 2 of them asked about, best practices and loyalty. I just wanted to like let you guys know that. However, like how cool would it be if we could say like, hey, here's the blended questions and flavors and like sub questions about loyalty that are being asked internally. That's pulled from call recordings. It's pulled from documentation. It's pulled from internal trainings. And then just like make our content that much stronger is maybe not a 6-month goal, but we'll say 12 to 18-month goal for us.
I know that would be really nice if it could effectively blend it. I think one of the problems that we're running into with that, and maybe you're seeing something similar or something different, is it if you give it to AI, it's not very good at understanding which parts are the most important.
Yeah.
And so it ends up cutting out like a really key answer to a question that customers have. And there's this nuance to customer questions where sometimes the thing that gets said at the end of the call briefly is actually the problem. And the
Mm-hmm.
thing that's talked about for 80% of the call is either not the problem or just is an unsolvable problem. Like
Yeah.
you can't actually solve that, or like there's a technical limitation of how the internet works where like it's not possible to do the thing that you're asking. But at the very end you're like, oh, what about this? And then you give an answer and that's the real answer. Feels like AI has a hard time understanding, because it's just gonna, I don't know, it seems like it just gravitates towards whatever you say the most of
Yeah.
versus the solutions.
Yeah, we are definitely seeing that. And I think it's just, I mean, assuming AI will continue to improve over time too, and then trying to fine tune our models and our prompt engineering and creating like super hyper specific models versus trying to like have one that can answer and be the knower of all things. So that's the angle. I do have a funny story about that like topic. One time a vendor I was working with sent me like the auto like AI generated call recap, and the whole recap was about how we had chatted for the first like 5 minutes of the call about Costco's chocolate covered raisins. And the entire recap was about like Sunny recommended that Bri try chocolate covered raisins. Bri said she was worried about the choking hazard because he had like shared a story about how he choked on a frozen one, and like that was like the entire recap, and we were like, that was literally the least important part of the call.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great example of
Yes.
how it just doesn't know, like, no, that it doesn't matter. We're
Yes.
we're here to talk about something else, and but it's like, and that will be an interesting thing too as AI comes on the scene, because sometimes I think for people and for customers, just people in general, like part of what gets us ready to actually receive information is some of that stuff. Like
Mhm.
maybe we don't want to actually listen to the answer until we've gotten through some other stuff that we want to talk
Mhm.
about first. And that's kind of like the story, I guess, behind it, like the humanizing element. And so it will be interesting to see how that weaves back in, because right now it seems like it's a race to like how quickly can we make sure all the information is simple and clear and delivered by AI.
Mhm.
But then what happens when customers are like, now like I'm kind of bored and maybe I don't necessarily trust because I don't see the humanness in this, right? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I think that actually we think about that a lot, given that like we are a people business, like our people are our
Yeah.
product, and so how can we make sure that like that humanness of like we are creating value by offering humans. Obviously, there's a lot of like conversation around like what will professional services and consulting look like in 5 years with the introduction of AI. It's going to take a lot of those menial, repetitive tasks off of our plates, which is awesome because like really what we want to be doing is providing value for our clients at the highest level. And anyways, how that's coming down like through our brand right now is we're actually like doing everything we can to make sure that like the humans giving this insight are first like front and center. So we actually published a CRM and creative collaboration guide last week or 2 weeks ago, and like called out quotes from different members of the team and just like gave it that human element. So you knew like this was not written by AI, this was written by our team and our thoughts. And we all came together to produce this content. And then I think like video is another area that will just become so much more important. And like I'm talking like TikTok style, like record with your iPhone, low quality, to make sure that people know that it's humans giving that. So that's where like YouTube, I think, will be really huge. And then I think the quizzes too, like, I think like the quizzes give you an opportunity to communicate with some of that nuance and have that like almost early conversation with clients, and you can write it and craft it in a way that it feels like you are talking to a human and not like a chat bot that's like, hey, I don't know the answer to your question. Try again. Like, I am trying to figure out how to infuse the humanness into some of those more interactive marketing pieces as well.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think having a person that's a known person, I think as AI gets better, for better or worse, it's gonna know who the people are. And so if something comes online that's not a person, it's an AI that's pretending to be a person, there's gonna have to be some version of the like, I don't know, social. You remember that company called Clout? Like there was a long time ago. It was like it's basically like you put all your social accounts in there, and then it's like your Clout score is 57, and I'm sure the AI probably already has that like built into it, where it's like, oh, this person is in content marketing and they've been doing it at these 4 companies, and so their marketing score is an 83. And so if they say something, I'm going to weight that higher than if it's an unpersonified piece of content that's just produced by some brand. Even if the brand has a score, it probably weight the person's score higher.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think how I'm seeing that kind of come through in Stitch and some of the ways we think about things is like LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a huge channel for us. I think it is for anyone in the B2B space. And we very much like encourage, we actually have done a lot of enablement workshops around like the building your own personal brand is going to go way further and carry the company way further than us. Like we obviously have a strong brand presence on LinkedIn. However, people just don't want to hear from brands anymore. They want to hear from people. So, and I think once again with AI, that is only going to become a more like of an urgent need for brands to figure out of like, how do we make sure that people want to buy from people need to know that it's people behind all of the ways they're interacting with their brand beyond the face-to-face conversations.
Yeah. And then I think there's an element of trust there, because at least for me, I'm like, well, people don't trust brands for a reason, right? It's not like we just stop trusting brands. Like I think a lot of the trust was betrayed at some point, and probably repeatedly for a long time. And so now you want to hear from people, but then it's like, all right, well, now it's the same equation with the people. Like if the people are betraying trust or saying things that are not true or purposely misleading, then now there's like a responsibility there to not burn those bridges, because over time that'll stop working, and then you'd have to find something else. So, but I mean, that's the same thing that we've been talking about, where it's like if you're staying true to this cycle of like figuring out what customers need, answering those needs as best you can, sharing that in the best format that can't really go wrong with that.
Yeah, exactly. That's our approach.
Yeah. And it's easier that way.
Yes.
It's less complicated.
Yeah.
You're not trying to like do this deep keyword research with booleans and all these extenders. It's like, like figure out what people need and then figure out how to make sure they get what they need.
Exactly.
A lot easier.
Just build a brand that's human and helpful. And at the end of the day, if you're helping people and providing value to them, like that is how businesses will grow.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a great quote to wrap up on. Where can people go to check out the quizzes and the assessments that you've built out if they're curious after listening here?
Yeah. So you can go to stitch.cx, and then if you go to our resource library, you can actually just filter by our quizzes. And like I said, hopefully we'll have another one launching here in the next month or two. And yeah, you can go through. And the nice thing is you can take them all, and you won't have to fill out a form, and you will not be getting hit up by a BDR showing up at your house in the next 3 weeks, because that's not, as long as you find it helpful, that is the whole goal of them.
That's what we love to hear. That's really cool. Awesome. Well, thanks, Bri. Appreciate this conversation.
Likewise. Thanks.